Well, kind of, sort of. The title for this video is a bit misleading, but not really. And that I've decided to combine two subjects in one. The unfortunate news coming out of DC, which had to see coming a mile away. So I'll discuss that somewhat, but for the most part, discussing Zack Snyder's Justice League, in that Zack teased an image of Monster Steppenwolf on his Vero account. And then, according to Grace Randolph, she when she got to do that interview with him, she did get to see a little bit of what the trailer will be, and that will debut at DC Fandom on the 22nd of this month, that being August 2020, the time that I am taping this. But anyway, it was not a big surprise about Monster Steppenwolf replacing the theatrical version, which Snyder himself did work on before he left the project. That would have been the 214 version, I believe. But now, with everything going his way, he decided to revert him back to his original concept and the concept art and all of that. And there was some animatics, I guess you call it, version of it that is on YouTube, perhaps still on YouTube, I forget exactly where, of Steppenwolf fighting Aquaman and the Atlanteans. That scene that was in the theatrical movie, but in this version it was clearly the monster version of Steppenwolf, the one that appeared to Luthor in the ultimate cut of Batman versus Superman. Which was a scene that clearly sets up more than anything else for Justice League, and yet that was cut out of the theatrical version of Batman vs. Superman. You see, the interference with Zack was from the beginning. But anyway, so you get these two versions. I mean, this new version of, old version of Steppenwolf, and that'll be in there, and we'll get to see him in action in that trailer for Justice League, which Zack Snyder's Justice League, which will debut on HBO Max sometime next year. Perhaps we'll get more of a definitive date, and perhaps even more significant, I think, is whether or not this will be in the form of a 4-hour movie or a miniseries on the streaming service, which has me quite intrigued. I hadn't even considered that until they announced this, that was a possibility of what they would do with it. So anyway, so here you have these different versions of Steppenwolf, and neither one looks anything like the original. Jack Kirby's character, Steppenwolf, had this more medieval type of look to him. It was his green outfit. And in the plot of New Gods, Darkseid wasn't really all that powerful or of high rank. He was actually under Steppenwolf in rank, as Steppenwolf was his uncle. Now, I believe in Zack Snyder's version, they're brothers, but Darkseid's mother was Steppenwolf's sister, and Steppenwolf's sister, or Darkseid's mother, Hagra, I believe. I keep blanking on her name, but she was the original ruler of Apocalypse, and Darkseid plotting and manipulating events, wanting to get power. And apparently, out of a broken heart somewhat, he had a wife, but his mother didn't approve of her, so she had his wife killed. Jeez. It's sort of this medieval intrigue of royal families and whatnot. And then she arranged for Darkseid to have another wife, who is the actual mother of Orion, who is the hero of New Gods for the most part, the main one of the New Gods story. So Darkseid, in the meantime, after that happened, he lost his wife that he actually cared about, apparently, and now he's just a monster after that. So he plots to get rid of his mother, take power, and ruins Steppenwolf in this by manipulating him into a war with their mortal enemies, the New Gods of New Genesis. And there you go in the story. You can read about in the New Gods Omnibus and all that. I don't know how much of that we'll get. A lot of those details, it's very erratic and scattered about the way Jack Kirby did it, but the concepts and ideas are all there, and it's so much material to draw from. They could do a whole other franchise of that in and of itself. but I seriously doubt we're going to get that if this continues with the Ava DuVernay and Tom King version. I just don't think that's going to be any good. So, too bad, huh? Meanwhile, we've got Snyder's version as it pertains to Justice League, and so I'm guessing this was probably some of the Jeff Johns manipulation in that they wanted it to look more like the version they had for New 52. Now, before that happened, Steppenwolf died early on in the New God story, and then Darkseid had him resurrected, but he was always just going to be his slave. You know, he was never really his full powerful self as he was before he died. And then eventually, by the time the DC in the 80s was looking to compete with Secret Wars toy line, so they decided to do superpowers, and the Darkseid, the Apocalypse characters were involved in that, and Steppenwolf was brought in. They gave him a new look to make for a better action figure, I guess. And there you see him. That's the appearance he had. And that was about it. And New Gods kind of went dormant. And sadly, with the passing of Jack Kirby, it wasn't really approached much. And then finally, Walter Simonson and John Byrne came at it. And a lot of people have taken shots at it. But ultimately, when DC did their New 52, they reintroduced Steppenwolf in this form with the helmet with horns and all that. And that's the first time that look really appeared. And that appears to be the form they wanted to reflect in the film. And I'm thinking, you know, when the Johns influence came on, he was more about making it correspond to the comics at the time. So, and New 52 was still ongoing at the time. And so I think that explains that look with the helmet of horns and all that. But even the original look had to have been influenced by this one, but they decided to push it further into the fact that he's a monster and the horns are just part of his head. That's what he looks like. And pushing it more into this idea of being gods and not human in any way. And, of course, evil gods in this aspect of it. And that's the form that Snyder appeared to be pushing for, and he's going to get it. So that's what you'll see there. But, well, we'll see how that works out. Now, DC Comics, of course, is in trouble as the entire comic industry is. There's a number of reasons for it. But DC Comics was not as bad a perpetrator of the bad business practices and treatment to their audience or customer base as Marvel was in the past 5 or so years of doing nothing but pushing hard leftist identity politics nonsense, which often ends up being more racist and sexist than the racism and sexism they claim to be fighting against or what have you. And it just drove everyone away even more at a time when it really couldn't afford to do that, even though the success of movies, most notably the Marvel movies, was at an all-time high. And yet the comic books that they're derivative of were flailing, and hiring cheap artists, and a lot of it you can see a lot of it had to do with just how cheap the writers and artists could be when they were just these people who just wanted the status of having been an artist on a Marvel comic book or something like that, and that's it, because the pay was terrible. And they're all talking about how, and especially, trying to live on $30K a year in Manhattan is just not it's not gonna happen. And so all of that goes about these Tumblr artists and whatnot were cheaper to get, and it showed. The work was not even that great. The art failed, and so you did have some good artists, but a lot of them weren't getting the work, and so on and so forth. And if you didn't like the book, then you were, an evil, nasty, white supremacist, what have you. And you cannot shame people into your product. Like, oh, I don't want people to think I'm racist, so I'll buy the company. The stories have to be good. And that's just too bad, isn't it? So DC, on the other hand, was not as bad at it as Marvel. There were some leftist messages in DC Comics and all of that, but they just didn't seem to push it that far. They would do token things like when they did the New 52 and the new version of Earth 2, and that Green Lantern was suddenly gay and all that, and it seemed very shoehorned and slapped on. The Earth 2 story started out interesting, and a lot of its aspects seemed to influence the plot of Snyder's Justice League, where Steppenwolf comes to Earth and attacks it. They had an invasion, and this resulted in the death of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. We later learned that Superman had survived, but an evil version of him came to take over the world. He kills Steppenwolf and takes his place. And the narrative they had, gee, sounds familiar. Later on, we discover that was just a clone. The real Superman was still trapped on Apocalypse and being tortured and everything. So it was a long-winded story, but it kind of fizzled when they destroyed the Earth, and it's a long-winded thing. Anyway, there's that aspect. Then there's Justice League Dark, which seems to follow the plot of what Justice League 2 would have been. I'll do a video on that. Not too happy with it, but I can see what they mean, that the aspects of the plot are very similar to that. So some of these ideas, are floating around, and there is, an homage, if you will, and a recognition of what DC Comics did, and to do an adaptation and try to encapsulate that as much as possible within the cinematic version of it, and all of that. But the point being, can Snyder Cut save DC? Well, I don't know about DC Comics. DC Comics, there'll still be something published. I don't know what kind of entity that would be, if it's just going to be the label that gets licensed out and farmed out to other workshops that will produce comics, or if they'll just do reprints, or there'll be these specials here and there. But the ongoing thing that it has been, I think, is the clock is already, it quit ticking. I mean, it's just a matter of figuring out what to do with it. I just don't think it's going to continue as it was with the floppy comic books that we know. And I think that a lot of that was the Walmart books and stuff like that, and Earth One and Black Label. They were trying to figure out what to switch to in order to give a workable entity there. But the layoffs and everything that's all a part of the streaming of the fat, that AT&T took on the debt when they bought Warner, and that's to be expected. And something like DC Comics has got to prove its value. It is the origin of these brands, of the characters of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. And so there's some amount of desire to maintain that, but at the moment, the only excitement for it all is really Snyder Cut. So it really does have to perform very well, but at the moment, that's cultivating a lot of it, and it maintains the interest beyond just hardcore DC fans for that. So since it's going to HBO Max, that will be the home of these entities. I did enjoy the DC streaming service, but it's not going to attract enough, so it's just going to have to get folded into HBO Max. And I just don't know when they're going to announce that, but it should probably soon. And some of those guys they lost their jobs as well as part of this, not just some of the editorial people and whatnot from DC Comics. And they'll try to streamline it and make it lean and mean like Monster Steppenwolf here. and move forward that way, and even licensing it out to a publishing house that can maintain it, on the cheap. I mean, but preferably, hopefully, they can come up with. You're gonna need the cash for artists that can actually produce work that people are interested in looking at. None of this fat Wonder Woman stuff. With the overall look of it was like from Nagel prints that were from the 80s and all that. That's not how Nagel did women. So it's kind of odd that's kind of the thing right before the axe fell. This is what someone puts out. Now no, this is the new look of one. No, we weren't doing that. But boy, it is telling somewhat, isn't it? So but yes, the excitement for Zack Snyder's Justice League is really pulling a lot here. And they already did tie-ins, I believe. Yes, they did. They did a brief little prequel comic for Man of Steel, but also Batman versus Superman had some. And I don't know, maybe they'll do an adaptation or something like that, or some fill-ins for the overall story, depending on the response for Snyder Cut or Zack Snyder's Justice League, and how further it can go and what they can branch off from to create this HBO Max franchise that's huge and, you know, draws people in and keeps that excitement going. So you might want to keep a little publishing entity, or at least control of it to an extent if you're going to farm it out, but also, you know, again, control and whatnot. So there might be an office called DC Comics, whether it involves Jim Lee or not, I don't know. Really, Jim Lee needs to be drawing Batman, or in my opinion, Superman, and get Dan Jurgens writing Superman stories, and forget about Bendis. You know, Bendis had his moment in the past, but for whatever reason, he just doesn't have it anymore, and is still clutching at that. Hopefully, he'll get that opportunity to get back into Hollywood, and that's what he's interested in. I'm assuming, but his Superman ideas just aren't any good. And it was doing really good under Dan Jurgens, and then all of a sudden, hey, look, everybody, Bendis, and I just no. Just right off the bat, I could tell. I tried, you know, I read a little bit of it, and then I was, ugh, can't do it. So, but Jim Lee drawing that that would be great. He needs to just draw. As far as being, you know, the publisher and manager of all that, I'm not so certain about that. But it's probably one of these positions nobody wants at the moment. But hopefully someone steps up and there is something of DC Comics. But yeah, it won't be what it was. In fact, it already isn't. So, but meanwhile, yes, the shining light on the hill for the moment is Zack Snyder's Justice League. Like it or not, you know, I mean, look, there's aspects of his versions of DC's heroes that I don't like, but there was enough there for me to enjoy it and certainly get excited about seeing what his version of Justice League was supposed to be. So that's the good news for that sinking ship of DC. Perhaps Snyder can toss them a lifesaver here, and we'll see where it goes in the future.
All right. Thank you for watching and listening. Why not like and subscribe, and check out that link description below. That'll take you to my mini stores that have plenty of goodies for you. You know, hats, mugs, stickers, posters, all that goody stuff. Plus, you can head over to indieplanet.com and pick up a copy of my comic book Night Night. Oh, yeah. Plus, you can also catch my podcast, Mr Nailsin Show, over at RadioMisfits.com. And you can also watch my videos on my channel at BitChute. That's the Mr Nailsin channel on BitChute.com.